All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you guys are joining in from. And thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. So this session was supposed to be starting with Jason Beres, our Senior VP Developer Tools, Infragistics. But unfortunately, we had some technical issues and we got locked out. And my name is Nishanth. I work as a technical evangelist with Infragistics, and I'll be taking you guys through this webinar today. And Tom will be on our questions panel as well. Tom is also a technical evangelist with Infragistics, so you can post in the Q&A out there, and we will be answering them as we progress with this webinar. All right, so let's get started. Talking about the agenda, today I'm going to talk about MVVM pattern, briefly touch upon some basics, and then take you guys through a simple demo on MVVM in WPF. Because that's where MVVM really originated from. And then we will look into some demos on using MVVM in JavaScript with the help of Knockout.js. Further, we will explore Ignite UI, which is a HTML5 jQuery UX controls for building enterprise dashboards. We will also see some samples on Knockout.js integration with Ignite UI. After that, we'll open it up for the Q&A, and if you guys are having any questions, as I said before, you can add them to the Q&A panel, and we'll take them up one by one at the end of this webinar. Or if Tom gets to log in before that, he should be able to answer your questions while the webinar is in progress. Okay, talking about introduction to MVVM. MVVM is an architectural design pattern, and patterns in general are guidelines and not rules. Means there's no rule that you should follow them. But these patterns solve a particular problem like separation of concerns, code maintenance, testability, and loose coupling. And most importantly, they're tested from the folks in the industry. So as long as you understand when to follow them, you're good to go. MVVM is inspired by various other UI patterns that you already know, like model, view, controller pattern, which is the MVC pattern out there, which is one of the oldest patterns and widely followed in the web technologies. Broadly speaking, the model view model pattern attempts to gain both the advantages of separation of functional development provided by MVC as well as leveraging the advantages of data bindings provided by the framework. View model, it has something called as view model, which is nothing but the model of the view. It was first unveiled by John Gossman in 2005, and where he worked as an architect at Microsoft for WPF and Silverlight team. So MVVM pattern was conceived to support WPF and Silverlight. Basically, it leverages the advantages of data bindings provided by the framework, and we'll look into these things in detail. Talking about model and view, basically these both are the same stuff as in classic MVC pattern. A model consists of an application data and business rules, also known as domain model or entities. It may include a data access as well, but it will definitely exclude UI-specific logic. A view, on the other hand, is what the user sees and interacts with. So it's a HTML page on the web browser, or could be a XAML in case of a WPF. It contains controls such as text boxes, buttons, and occasionally it may have view behavior such as animations and transitions. Now talking about view model. ViewModel is responsible for handling the UI logic. It can hold an application state and expose application's data and operations to the view using view bindings. In WPF, a ViewModel is a class that implements iNotify property change interface and will have some public properties that are, all right, just let me shut on my Outlook so that we don't have disturbances out there. All right, so repeating about view model, basically, in case of a WPF, it's basically a class which implements iNotify property changed, and it will have public properties that are used for binding in the view, which will ensure automatic refreshes as the data changes, either by an action from the user or by the change in the data from the server itself. This eliminates the need of having an event subscription model out there. We will see this in an example so that you get to understand this really better. Like in any other pattern out there, we need to understand the benefits of this pattern. So let's look at the benefits for some time. One important benefit is the developer-designer collaboration with no conflict. Many a times you know what happens when a designer works on your code and everything looks awesome, but you know what? He just messed up your event handlers. In this case, there is a cleaner separation between the two, so there's no worry absolutely. Other important aspect is the testable code. Basically, decoupling the view from the view model enables us to write really clean unit tests. Other important aspect is basically the code maintainability. And of course, you'll agree with me that the testable and decoupled code is easier to maintain because a bug can be found much more easily if there is only one place to inspect about it. All right, so with that, let me take you guys through a simple WPF and Silverlight demo, and we will look into the details of how what is a view model in general in WPF application, and then we will go into a nice demo on JavaScript on MVVM. So let me just quickly share my screen, the Visual Studio. Okay, there you go. So it's a simple application, so I'm just going to start this application for a moment and show you what I'm really trying to achieve out here. So I have basically three boxes that is going to accept some input from the user. There's a name, there's a date of birth, and there is age out there. All right, so what you see here is what I want to show you here is whenever you select a date of birth, for example, I go and select a particular age, which is a little older, and when I change it, you can see that automatically the age is actually calculated. Now, what's the orthodox way of doing things? The orthodox way of doing things is just to go and double-click this date of birth selection date, that's the date picker, and write the select change event handler, and write them there, calculating age. Now, let's look at how this is implemented using ViewModel. So if you look at the XAML out there, and I will show you the code behind for a moment, you can see that absolutely there are no event handlers for the selection changed out there. It is completely clean. So that means you would have guessed it right that I have actually separated that thing into the view model. So let's go into the main window XAML first, and I will show you how this has been built out here. So first thing I did is I set the data context of this window to the main window view model, which means that anything that is bound inside this view, the properties that are bound inside the view have to be looked up onto my view model for the data binding to work. So I set the data context out here, and then I have few text boxes where the text is bound to the name property in case of the text box name, and age in case of an age, and date of birth in case of the date of birth property out there. So you can see that what I've done is basically gone and selected and bound this property called DOB out there onto the selected date. And you can see that in case of a submit, I don't have a clicked event handler. Instead, I'm using this command to basically bind to a save command, and which is actually written inside your view model. So let's go and look at the view model. So as you see here, there is name, age, and DOB, which actually has to be the properties inside the view model. So you can see that in the view model, this is a class which implements iNotifyPropertyChanged. And iNotifyPropertyChange basically provides you with this property change event handler, and you will be basically writing the rasePropertyChange method out here, and you're going checking for property changed, null check, and then raising the property change accordingly. Now this is a helper method. You can write whatever you want. You can say raise property change, or you can write on property change, or whatever you want. And then you can see what I've done here is I have name, DOB, and age out here. And what I'm doing is whenever someone selects the date of birth, and see, these are the properties that are actually bound to the view, name, DOB, and age. Now, when someone goes and selects the date of birth out in the date picker, I'm actually raising the property change out here. So I'm raising the property change, hey, the date of birth has changed. But along with that, I'm also raising another property change saying, hey, age also has changed. So what happens is whenever this property change event occurs, it actually goes and asks for a new age into the age getter, and this time it is going to give a new value out there. So doing this, you're actually not using any kind of selection change, but you're making use of the property change event handler itself to do this value for you. So here you go. So you have the view model, you have the name DLB and age out there, and there is a property change event handler out there which is actually raising property change. And behind the scenes, the WPF data binding is actually hooking onto your property change, and whenever there is a change, it is actually really going and changing that stuff out there for you. So let's do this again, and I'll show you what exactly is happening out here. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint out here in this getter, and I'm going to say the selection change to some other value, and you can see that the getter is called again because the setter of this was fired, and now I get this new value out here. So that's what is happening here. So this is an age calculation, but this is not the right algorithm to do so, but this is only for demo purpose. So this is what I want to explain you today on the view model front. And there is a save command which I haven't showed you yet. So the save command actually implements this iCommand interface, which has two methods like can execute and execute. So there is a cleaner separation again. Now this particular save command is actually referenced inside your view model. That's right here, right out here. So if in case you want to reuse the save command, you can always do that at different levels of your project. So that way you have a cleaner separation between the logic of the view and the view itself. So you have the save command out here, and basically when the command is called from the XAML out here, it says save command. Internally, the execute method is called when you click on the button. And there is another thing called can execute method. This is a method actually where you write the logic where you say whether this command can be executed right now or not. So that can be done. So for example, if you want the user to enter the date of birth and name compulsorily, and only then he can click submit button, that's when you will write those kind of logic out here. So that time what happens is it just simply disables the submit button until you actually have some values out here. So that was a simple view model example out there. So with that, let's get back to the slide, and we will quickly see some demos on WPF and Silverlight. JavaScript basically. All right, talking about JavaScript. JavaScript has become one of the most popular programming languages on the web. At first, developers didn't take it seriously simply because it was not intended for server-side programming. It was a common misconception among professional developers that this language was meant for amateurs, as it focused only on user interface. JavaScript got the spotlight when the usage of Ajax came to light, and professional programmers gave importance to the responsiveness of the page. But now, the language has become more popular than ever, as the user experience has become the key part of web development. Accessing web is not limited to desktop browsers alone. There are many devices with varying screen sizes accessing the same content. So with the rise of HTML5 and CSS3, the web will become more adaptive and responsive than ever, and JavaScript plays really a major role in it. Talking about JavaScript MV frameworks out there, increase in usage of JavaScript in modern applications demand developers to write maintainable code, separate concerns, and improve testability. JavaScript is a class-less language and it was not designed to support object-oriented programming. However, you can achieve similar results by workarounds. So if you are a developer from an object-oriented programming world, then you will find it hard until you get used to it. Though there are some DOM manipulations libraries like there's jQuery, which simplifies client-side scripting of HTML, they actually do not solve the problem of effectively handling separation of concerns. So even if you do so, you will end up writing many jQuery selectors and callbacks to keep the data in sync between the HTML, JavaScript, and the data fetched from the server, and we are still stuck with something called as spaghetti code. Building single-page applications using JavaScript are getting popular these days, and good examples of them are Gmail and Google Docs. When you set out to build these type of applications, you will most likely invent many of the pieces that make up an MV coding paradigm. So instead, you can make use of some of the famous libraries such as Backbone.js, there is Knockout.js, there is Angular.js, and also there is Ember.js. To give you simple examples, like for example, Backbone.js is also a very famous JavaScript MV library out there. Why we call it as MV? Because there is MVC, there is MVP, there is MVVM. So just to keep it really small, we say, okay, it's MV star frameworks out there. So Backbone.js is somewhat, it implements somewhat MVC. There is Angular, there's Ember, which also supports these bindings, data bindings out there. But they are truly frameworks. They are not just library. If you guys know something like Prism, MVVM Lite, Caliban, if you look at that, they are really frameworks out there which gives you which lesser flexibility because their framework extensively take care of things what you really need to do. So similar to that, Angular and Embers are frameworks out there which helps you do a lot of stuff in much simpler way. But when it comes to Knockout and Backbone, they're libraries and they are there for a specific purpose. For example, to implement a specific pattern like MVVM. So now that we are familiar with MVVM, because I really went quickly on MVVM on WPF Silverlight because we need to cover a little bit on the MVVM on the JavaScript side. So we will look at MVVM. We'll look at what library really brings MVVM in JavaScript. So introducing Knockout.js. Knockout.js is an open source JavaScript library that enables MVVM applications by implementing declarative binding. So all the properties in your view model that basically are written in JavaScript has to be of type ko.observable to make sure it participates in property changes. Observables in JavaScript are just like race property change that you saw just now in the WPF sample. All that they do is they go and notify subscribers of property changes. Coming to the most important aspect of JavaScript library, that's the browser support. Knockout supports all the major browsers. In case of an Internet Explorer, it supports from version 6 onwards, and in case of Firefox, it supports version 2 onwards, and it supports all the latest versions of Chrome, Safari, and Opera. So let's take a quick comparison between the working of MVVM in WPF and JavaScript. So if you look at here, in case of a WPF, you have a window that is actually finally shown to the user. Below that is the presentation layer, nothing but the XAML that you've been writing, with completely the element tags out there, XAML kind of element stacks out there. And then you have the business logic. Basically, you wrote the view model in C#, and there is a runtime called the CLR, which actually takes care of the XAML binding between the XAML and your view model, which is written in C#. So the same thing in case of a Knockout.js or in case of a MVVM in JavaScript, what we have here is a page which has the presentation layer below. It could be HTML, it could be HTML5, different versions of whatever you want to, whatever versions of HTML you want to use. And right below is the business logic that you're going to write, and that's the JavaScript. And to make sure that these work together, the data binding works really well, and that is by the runtime which has the Knockout integrator into the browsers. So let's quickly see how do we refer Knockout.js library into our HTML page. So to do Knockout, to bring Knockout to the to your MVVM in JavaScript, all that you need to do is there are 3 steps to it. And the first step is, as any other whatever you do with any other JavaScript library out there, you would do the same. Like for example, you add the JavaScript into your HTML page using the script tag, and you provide the source to say what is the Knockout.js library that you're going to use. And the next step that you're going to do is basically associate the view model with your view. Just like you set the view model to the data context of the window in WPF, you need to do the same here. And to do so, what you're going to use here is the ko.apply binding syntax, and make sure you pass your view model as your parameter onto that. So here is the third step to it, which is the declarative binding. So as you saw in the XAML, you just say binding. If you're saying, if you're setting it to a text, you say the binding and then say the property that you are actually binding to. So here you can see that there is a new attribute that you're going to see that's called data-bind. And then you say what kind of a binding are you going to bind to. Say, for example, in this case, it's foreach customers. So which means customers is a property which is actually represented in the view model itself. So these are the 3 steps to make sure that your Knockout.js is integrated into your application and MVVM is enabled for you. So let's go deeper and understand a little bit of bindings. Knockout provides you with built-in data bindings such as foreach, visible, value, click, and there are so many out there where you can those things can be referred in the Knockout's documentation. In case you're not happy with built-in bindings, what Knockout provides, you can always roll your own. And Knockout provides you with a simple technique to have custom bindings as well. So in case of a for each, in this case, the for each binding, you will be attaching it to a property that is a JavaScript array or a Knockout's observable array in your view model. The Knockout will actually iterate through a loop and apply the same markup to each item in the list. It's kind of templating. So we'll take a look at this particular for each block in our demo today, so you guys can understand it really well. Then we have visible binding, so you can use a visible binding to toggle the visibility based on your business logic. Say you want to show up error based on some kind of a logic out there, you can make the visibility of that error division enabled, say true and false, and then it'll behave accordingly. And then you have the value bindings, basically in terms of if you are using forms fields, you will be binding to the value of it, because you want to make sure that data binding of the properties in the view model works well when you're binding it to the HTML. Then there's click binding. It works similar, like it's a click event that you would be attaching, basically a function which is written inside the view model. So we will look at all these things right now in a demo. Okay, so before that, one question that I always get when I do this talk is whether Knockout is a replacement of jQuery. The answer to it is absolutely no. Knockout solves a completely different problem. It helps you write MVVM in JavaScript. So, what jQuery does is it helps you manipulate some HTML DOM elements and gives you some nice libraries to have selectors, selecting your elements and all those things. But just make sure that that you understand this right, because both of them can work really well together. So you guys don't have to really say that, okay, if I'm using Knockout, I don't have to really use jQuery and all those things. Knockout and jQuery can work together very, very well. All right, so with that, let's quickly go into a Knockout.js demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to code up a demo out there. So I'm going to use this. Okay, just let me. Okay. So I'm going to show you what exactly I have done so far so that you guys can see it. And okay, so there you go. So it's a simple to-do app that I'm trying to build using Knockout.js out here. So you can see that it's just a simple index.html page. The project contains just index.html page, and I'm just using the Twitter Bootstrap to just make it look nice. And I'm using a jQuery basically to start with the document.ready function. That's it. And I am using Knockout's 2.2.1 version of it, and I've just included them in my HTML page. So right now there's absolutely nothing out there, so except for referencing all these things like script tags out there. And then on the right, what you see is basically what I'm going to build the final output to it. So, and then there is a little bit of division tags and all those things out there. So this is where I'm going to start writing the code. So we're going to build a small to-do app in Knockout. So first thing I'm going to do is I want say input type of text, which is a text box out there. So I need a text box. So you can see on the right side of my screen is where the text box starts to appear. And I want to bind something to this text box, just like how we did in the WPF. I want to bind something. And what I'm going to bind is I'm going to use the built-in binding of Knockout and say, hey, bind it to the value of this particular text box. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want to bind something to item. Now you know that this particular item has to be existing in your view model. So that means I need to write up some view model out here. So this is my JavaScript block, and I'm going to write my view model out here. So I'm going to say var, here I'm going to say app view model. I'm going to call it as a function. And I'm going to start to write on this. So first thing I do is I hold the reference of this, because in JavaScript this is actually the function context of the calling method, and unlike the other ones in C# and all those things. So make sure that you get that right. So I'm going to hold it there, and then I'm going to say, okay, I just want item. So I'm going to say self.item equals something. So first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to put a value to this. I'm going to say, okay, do demo as my first to-do item. I'm going to put that over here. And see, ideally, that demo is supposed to come here because there is data bind out here, which is actually binding to your view model property. Now that, if you see, there's no binding happening yet because we didn't follow the second step, that is actually binding it. Just like in WPF, how you set the data context of the view, you need to set the same thing out here. So you call it as apply bindings. So just like jQuery has $defined when you enter jQuery, ko is the keyword that you will be using to do the rest of your stuff out here. So I'm going to say new app view model. Now I'm just saying, okay, this is my view model that I'm going to bind it to this particular view. So you can see on the right side, the moment I do that, I have already got the value bound to this. So now let's do that. Let's do one more thing. I'm going to repeat the same thing. So I'm just copy this and I just put this here. So I have another to-do item. Just to give you some clarity, I'm going to break this up. Okay. So put a break, and you can see that. And now I'm going to reload this, and you can see that there is the data binding has worked on both the text boxes. So there's do demo and do demo out here. Now ideally, if I go and change something here, do demo 1 2 3, and then tab out, even this value is supposed to change because I have bound this value to the view model, right? Now if you see, this is only what has happened right now is just the one-way binding what has happened. So which means from the view model there is a binding out here, but there is no way this value is getting updated back to the view model, and that's because you haven't told it to do so. So what you're going to do here is I'm going to initialize it with ko.observable. So which means that any change that happens out here in this particular item has to be observed of changes, and that has to be notified to the rest of the people who is actually trying to access the same value. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to reload this page. Now I'm going to say demo 1 2 3 and tab out, and you can see that the demo 1 2 3 has just updated on the second tab itself. So if you don't believe me, I have something to show you there. So I'm going to say another option called value update, and here I'm going to say after key down. So this will ensure, just watch out, as and when I type, okay, I'm going to reload this. As and when I type, you can see that there is a property change notification happening. So you can tell Knockout when do you want the value update to be fired. So you can say if it is after key down, you can say that by default it is actually when you tab out from this particular control. So there you see that it has really nicely participated in the changes on the MVVM. That's the view model. So I'm going to remove this for time being. Now let's do a little more tricks with this. Next thing I'm going to do is I don't want to repeat it like this. I don't want input type to be repeated like this. Instead, I want Knockout to repeat it for me. So for that, what I'm going to do is, let's say instead of single item, I may have to-dos, and within to-dos, I may have items, right? So I'm going to change this completely out here. So I'm going to say instead of item, I'm going to say to-dos as my and then define it as observable array this time. So if you want to make sure you have an array that is observing changes, you need to define it as observable array. So here I am, I'm defining this as an observable array, and here I'm defining an item wherein I just say demo 1 or do demo, whatever, do demo, and okay, so this is what happens when you really port yourself from C# to JavaScript. You'll make some silly mistakes out there. So here I'm actually putting an item out there with, so because I want multiple items, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define once again, and I say, okay, do demo, then I say do PPT as 2 items. Now you can see that there is only one value called item that is actually bound to this. So to make sure that I have every value in my to-dos repeating itself based on the items it is having it in itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the foreach binding that you saw in the slides. So I'm going to use a division out here first, and then here in the division I'm going to say bind this to the foreach and go look for a variable called to-dos, or the property called to-dos, and I'm going to put this whatever value I want to repeat, I'm going to put it inside the demo, inside division. Now you can see on the right side, it's an observable array, and the items, there are 2 items out there, and you can see that 2 items have been repeated itself. So I didn't write a second input element out there. The knockout just did it for me. So it's kind of a templating for me, right? If I have anything in my observable array, knockout will take care of repeating it for me. I just have to just focus on my view logic, and view is actually rendered by the knockout. All right, so which is cool. Now let's do a couple of more things. One is I have these values actually rendered because it is actually set in the starting itself. But what if I want the user to enter a value and I want to add it to this array? So let's do that. To do that, what I'm going to do is outside this division, because this division is going to repeat that element. So outside this division, I'm going to put an input type is text, and I'm going to say a placeholder out there. And in the placeholder, I'm going to say, okay, add new to do. Now I'm asking the user to enter the value, what he wants to enter. All right, so with this, now I want to have another one more thing out here is I want to put a button out here saying, okay, when you click this button, I want this value from this input type to go into my observable array. Okay, to do that, I'm going to say is an anchor tag, and here I'm going to say add as a button. So to make an anchor tag look like a button, actually Bootstrap provides some nice classes for it. So I'm going to use a class called button out there, and I'm going to say, okay, this is a large button, and just to make sure that it is a primary and the color is a little different, so I just use three classes: button, button large, and button primary. And I'm going to save this, and you can see that on the right side a nice button has come up. So this is something from the Twitter Bootstrap. So as and when I type something here and click add, I want that to be added into my observable array here to do's, so that knockout can repeat it again for me using the for each block. Now let's do that. First thing I need to do is I need to again do a data binding here and say, okay, the value of it has to be bind to something like new to do. Okay, so now new to do is not written in my view model yet, so I'm going to write that right now. So I'm going to say self dot new to do. Make sure the spellings are right. Otherwise, it's going to be really tough with JavaScript out there. So I have ko.observable. I'm going to set to none, no value right now. So which means this particular text box is actually bound to the view model's property called new to do. We're using this. You can see that the value is bound to new to do, which is fine. Now, when I click on this particular anchor tag, I want that value which is there right now in this input text to be added to my to-dos. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, here I'm going to use the binding called as click, and in the click I'm going to say add new to-do. Right, so I just to make sure that I'm not making any spelling mistake, I'm just copying the add new to-do out here. And then here I'm going to say self dot add new to do. Now I'm going to call it as a function, because this is going to be the function which is called by the click event handler. Like for example, it's a click data binding that you're trying to do here. So here, because you're in the view model, you have the access to the arrays that is defined here. So it's to do's. So now you're going to say it's going to be, I'm going to push a new value to this. So here you go. And this value is going to have something called as item and its value. And because it's an observable array, and make sure that it has to be on this format itself. And here you can just say that value is from something what you have already bound to the to your view model called new to do. So have a look at this. What I'm doing is I'm actually opening and closing the brackets, because in Knockout, when you define anything as ko.observable, it acts as a function, not as a simple variable out there. So it's going to be a function. So if you want a value from the function, make sure you open and close the brackets. So if you don't do that, you will not understand what error it pops out, and because it gives you a vague error which you will not be able to figure that out. So I took some time to figure that out. So make sure that you open and close the bracket whenever you want to access a value for it. All right, so let's see if this works. I'm going to reload this page, and I'm going to say test and say add, and you can see that a nice way of adding things, right? I didn't write jQuery selectors, and then I didn't ask click event and blah 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 stuffs. I just simply bound everything to the view model out there. So when I click on add, it just takes the value from this text box and adds to the observable array, and Knockout internally fires the for each block again because there is a change, and then it puts the new value into that element. Okay, so you can do a lot of stuff like, say, now you can see that test and test looks similar out there, so it's hardly people can differentiate between the two text boxes. So you can say, okay, now you're done your job, so now go and refresh yourself, set your value to something like empty. Now you have a look at this. The first time when I say ko.observable and define this new to do. But the next time onwards, I don't do that. Instead, I just directly say, open the brackets and say, okay, what value I want to do, set for this. So if you want some default value, say default to be set here, you can just say default and reload this page and add test, and you can see that that value is actually shown here. It's called default. Now that's how you set the values from there on. So I'm going to not have any value right now because I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to refresh this page, and you can see that I'll just say test, and then it has this regular text box that says, okay, add new to do now. So I can go on adding the to-dos. Okay, with this, we are somewhat familiar with observable array, and all those things. But let's do one more thing by going and removing this. Say I have these things out there, so now let me go and remove that. Now you'll be thinking, okay, that's a simple thing to do. Go and write the remove method out there. So you're right. So let's go and write the remove method. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, self.remove. I'll just say remove to do as a method, and I will call this function. And as you rightly guessed, I will just saying self.todos.remove. Now I need some value here that I need to pass on to remove that, right? I need to know exactly what is available here to remove it. So to do that, let's go back and to the data binding and see where exactly we are going to call remove. In my case, as part of best user experience, I want the remove button to be very next to the this particular text box itself. So I want a remove button out here. So when I click on remove, that particular whole button along with that text box is gone. So let's do that. So that means I'm already inside the foreach block, and this is where I will be defining my button very next to the input type. And here I'm going to call an anchor tag out here, and same like how we did. Now in the class, I'm going to say, this is again from Twitter Bootstrap. I'm going to say icon.remove. Now let's reload this page, and you can see that a nice little icon has just come in there. Okay, so this is also fine with me. Now I need to, when someone clicks on this, I need to go and call the remove to do function. Now, so I just say click. Now have a look at this. What has happened here is you're inside the for each block. Okay, you are inside to-dos, and within to-dos you have something called item. Now if you go into that particular function, you have to-dos, and within to-dos you have something called item, so which works well. So that means the binding context of this entire division is actually the to-dos, and every property that you write here will be checked inside this to-dos and not outside. Now if you look at the remove to-do function, is actually written outside your to-dos method. So you need to go back, go one level up, and to do that you're going to say $, you're going to use this keyword parent. You can use parent, you can use root, and there are some other values out there. You can check the Knockout.js documentation for it. So right now I'm going and looking at my parent, and that's where my function is. So I go and copy this remove to do stuff out here and then put it out here. So now I say, okay, when you click on this, go and search for the function in my parent. Now that's fine, but now I need to pass a value to that method to say which particular item to be removed. So now you know that how to make use of the value this, the keyword or the iterator this. Operator this. So you can see that what I'm doing right now is I'm in a division. Did I make anything wrong? Let me just do a Control Z. Okay, so I'm in the division, and so whenever it is on to-dos, and when this button is called, this particular binding context will have the value of this particular item out here. So that's why I can very confidently go and say I want to remove this, because this will have the function context that is getting called or getting invoked. So I'm going to redo this. I'm going to say test 1 2 3 and go and remove somewhere in between, and you can see that that particular value has got removed. So that's a neater way to write JavaScript stuffs out there. Knockout provides you with this amazing little functionality. So you saw that right now I just created a HTML page out there. wrote few lines of code with data-bind attribute so that Knockout works well. And then I did ko.apply bindings and said, okay, go attach this view model to this particular view and make sure the logic is written well. So that's it. That's about it. So that's a simple example of Todo App out there. Now I want to show you one more example out here because I showed you an application with a date change, that the selection change event that we saw in WPF and the similar one that we are really looking at. So we'll look at one other example for it. So I'm going to run this first and then show you what I'm really doing it. Okay, there you go. So I have something like a date of birth that you exactly saw in WPF Silverlight. Now here I'm using Infragistics Ignite UI date picker for this example. So it's basically the IG editors. So I just go and select some value. So let's go and select some value. Let's say 1982 and say 8, and then say tab out, and you can see that the age has actually reflected the change. So now let's look at the code. How did we do that? Now, as I said, Infragistics Ignite UI editor supports this Knockout.js extension, so which means you can go and write the same way how you have been writing in WPF Silverlight with these date pickers and all those things. So let me go back to the go to the HTML first, and I'll show you there is an input type of type DOB text out there, and you can see there's something called data-bind, and you can see something called as IG date picker. Now this is not something Knockout.js provides, and that's where what we did is we went and wrote the custom binding for it. So we wrote our own binding out here. We said IG date picker and then colon, and then I said value is from the date of birth. So that means that should be there in some of my view models. So you can see here out here I have an app view model here, and then I have some value called date of birth, and which is ko.observable, and then there is an age, basically self.age is the value is of type computed. Now this is where I want to introduce you to something called as computed functions in Knockout. So these are functions that are dependent on one or more observables. So say for example you have some values out here like date of birth, the observables. Your age depends completely on the date of birth out there. In that case you will not write it as observable. Instead you will write it as computed, because every time that date of birth changes, Knockout will ask the age to compute itself with the new value, and that's what it is doing right now. So it has ko.computed, and there I'm actually having a particular algorithm there to calculate the age, and then I'm passing that age out there to the age. So that's about it. And then when this particular thing runs, everything works just like a magic. So you have the date picker which comes up very nicely. This is using that Metro theme out there. And this is completely touch enabled, touch supported, and all those things because it's all part of the Ignite UI suite of products. So you can see that now when I go and change a particular age, let me go to an age and just tab out, and you can see that 30 is the age which is getting calculated out there. So the rest of the things that you see, just to give you an idea how this IG loader works, we have something called as IG loader because you just don't want to load everything that is there out there written inside the Ignite UI. So if you look at the IG folder, you have this modules folder again, which has a lot of JavaScripts out there, and every JavaScript is actually put into a modules because it's a specific particular control that is in there. So you want to, in case you're working on editors, you just want to load editors, you just don't want to load the grids and other stuff. So that's why we have something called as loader. You just provide the script path and CSS path out there, and then in the resources you just say, hey, go pick up IG editors based resources. That means it goes and picks the CSS and JavaScript accordingly. And then I'm also working with Ignite UI extension for Knockout, so I need to be loading that extension. So extensions are there in this folder, actually extensions out there. So you basically add the editors extension for Knockout, and that way when this runs, ultimately it loads only the necessary files that is needed for your app to run, and then you go and make this work for your customers out there. All right, so that's with the core editor. So let's quickly go back to the slides and all right, now talking about building enterprise dashboards using HTML5 jQuery. You know, when you set out to build enterprise dashboards, you'll obviously look at the best HTML5 based data visualizations, rocket fast performance that deliver across every browser every platform and every device out there. And that's why you basically need an amazing framework. That's the Ignite UI, the world's most advanced JavaScript and HTML5 UI framework. You saw that today with IG editors, which supports a nice and cleaner way to support Knockout.js there. So it's completely cross-platform web development. It's built on standards. It's completely touch-enabled HTML5 and jQuery experience for desktop, tablet, and mobile, including multi-device targeting with frameworks like, say, PhoneGap and MVC. It's completely built on HTML5, CSS3, and jQuery, adding it to high client-side performance. It supports Knockout.js that you saw just now, along with MVC 2 and 3 and 4 ASP.NET versions. And this toolkit contains high-performing charting controls and geospatial mapping. It also has amazing controls for your BI requirements like grids. There's extensive support for OLAP, and also has support for hierarchical grid, and also simple flat-based grid. If you're building some simple line of business applications, you can very well go and build those line of business application with these controls. So one important thing, since it's built on jQuery, we also support Theme Roller, where you can completely change the look and feel of this control and make it really look integrated with your web design. So with that, I have one demo to show you guys on Ignite UI and Knockout.js, and let's go into that. Basically, you guys can see this demo on the web itself. So you can go to infragistics.com, products, jQuery, and select the grid. And the grid actually, the complete grid actually supports the Knockout.js integration very nicely. And here is the thing where I've defined few observables out here. There is a product ID, product name, units of stock, and all those things. So have a look at this. This is only for demo purpose. So you can see that first row edit out there. So imagine you have the value. The entire value comes from some kind of a web API or RESTful sources out there, and you actually have bounded to the grid. Now think about going and editing this value just outside your grid, and say you want to edit a particular value in this particular row, and you want to edit that, make sure that it's really happening live, and that's really going to be a pain to do so. Now because there is a Knockout.js integration, very cleaner integration into our grids, you can see that when from chai 3, I'm going to say change it to something like coffee. Have a look at this particular area, the first row. As I change coffee, you can see that everything is getting changed out there. So that means it is very much integrated with the Knockout data source, the IG data source with Knockout.js integration. So you can see that there's a product name which is here, which is also changing out here, and the first row is also changing. So you can see that happening there. The first row completely 10 boxes to say 20 boxes, and you can see that thing completely getting displayed here. So let's look at the code a little bit to understand how this is being done. So I'm just going to pop out this code view for you, and I'm going to explain to you on the HTML side of it. So we reference few JavaScript files out there, and then we went and said, okay, in the loader, that okay, go pick up the script path, go pick up the CSS path, go pick up these resources from this particular. These are the resources I'm going to work on this and all those things. And then finally, let's go into the HTML first, where I want to show you how that grid actually is getting rendered. So here's a table, and in table I'm saying data-bind, and this is where I say, now just like how you saw in Ignite UI editors, IG editors I have used there, instead here it's been used as IG grid, and you say IG grid colon, then you say provide the data source. Basically this is the data, is the value which is actually there in the JavaScript above, and then you set few features out there, properties out there. You say auto comment is false, and there's features like updating, edit mode is a row edit mode, and you say, do you want to generate the columns automatically, or what are the columns you really want to set, and all those things. So few basic features that you will be setting out here. And then let's go and look at the data in the JavaScript. So okay, let's quickly, you can see that I'm getting every value from this Northwind products.results, basically a value which is coming from some server. I'm holding it on here, and then I have an item where I say, okay, everything inside this item, it has to be ko.observable. This way, once it is bound to the grid, because every item inside that is of type ko.observable, that is actually participating in the property chain. So that's the magic that you're seeing there. So you say this, and then there's a ViewModel out here, and that's where the data that you saw right now, which is being bound. So I'm initially it has been set to empty, and then it is actually gone and collected this data. You can see that it has gone and collected the data from the DB, which is actually connected from our some kind of a data source, and got the value from here, and it's actually populating this entire value out here. So it says self.data.push, and then you see this item, because you know there's all the items inside this is part of ko.observable. So it takes care of making notify property change out there. So you write that, and then you set to push everything out there inside this. And then finally you go and set the items view model out to the ko.apply binding. So this way you set everything right. And you can see the records count, which is nothing but a computed value. So it goes and checks the length and gets it back. So that's why every time it changes, it tells you what's the records count. Every time you add something, it goes and computes a new value to it, and then gets and displays it out there. All right, so that's as simple as that. So if you guys are building some enterprise applications, enterprise dashboards, you can very much make use of this Ignite UI grid and editors out there to build some really amazing dashboards out there. And the good news is we are all completely on the open platform, right? So you can use jQuery, you can use Knockout.js, and very much they're going to work together and well integrated onto your apps. All right, so with that, few resources out there. There has been a nice blog on Knockout and MVVM step by step, and basically there is KnockoutJS.com itself. You guys can go and look at it. There's a nice documentation out there, as well as there's a nice learning material out there. It helps you step by step learning, so you can just have a look at that. It's really amazing. If you want to know more about our Ignite UI controls, where you want to build some really amazing enterprise dashboards I just showed you grids and editors. You can build a lot of things on data visualization, charts, geospatial data, maps, and all those things. You can go and check out our products out there, infragistics.com/products/jQuery. All right, with that, thank you very much for joining in today. I really appreciate your time. So hope you guys enjoyed it. And with that, we will open this up for Q&A. And thank you very much.